Welcome to Master the Move, the back crucifix. The back crucifix is unusual among jiu-jitsu moves and holds, insofar as it is among the best finishing and control positions, but it scores no points. Usually in jiu-jitsu, the better the hold, the higher the score. Despite its lack of scoring potential, the back crucifix gives you excellent control over an opponent and a great ability to finish him. As such, it is a truly valuable addition to your offensive arsenal. The back crucifix integrates well with standard methods of rear mount back control and has some notable advantages. First, the change in angle from parallel to perpendicular often makes strangulation entry easier. Second, the crucifix removes the first line of defense for your opponent, his hands, again greatly facilitating successful strangulation. Third, from your opponent's point of view, defending a back crucifix is very different from defending a standard rear mount. Most of your opponents have far less experience defending back crucifix than they do rear mount, and thus it is considerably easier to get the breakthrough on most of your opponents. Fourth, the crucifix allows you to switch from strangles to arm locks without moving your body. In conventional back attacks, if I want to switch my position completely from strangle to arm lock, I have to move my whole body in order to do so. Not so with the back crucifix. This creates an excellent dilemma attack between strangle and arm lock, which is very difficult even for a skilled opponent to defend. Fifth, the back crucifix is a great equalizer for athletes with short legs who feel that conventional rear mount positions, which often favor taller, long-legged athletes who can easily hold body triangles around their opponents, are difficult for them. Back crucifix can easily be held by shorter athletes with thick legs who struggle with conventional body triangles and other forms of back attack. In this video, we will look at all aspects of the back crucifix. Everything from entries, from top and bottom, front and back, then moving on to different methods of control and finishing with strangles and arm locks. In addition, we will look at the integration of back crucifix positions with other forms of back control. Back attacks have always been one of the most successful signature moves of my students. I am certain we can make this variation work for you too. Now, let's start this video off looking at the idea of the logic of back control in jiu-jitsu. Okay, we're always taught the back is the ultimate position in grappling, and to a large degree, the back and also the mount are considered the premier positions to get into in the sport. What's the logic of back control? What is it based around? What are the central ideas of back control? Well, you'll see that they always come down to the idea of keeping your opponent and controlling them between your elbows and between your knees. Okay, so if we have an opponent in front of us and we're on their back, the key idea is the back control is that I keep my opponent between my elbows. That is often done, for example, with a seatbelt grip. It could also be done with going underneath both of my training partner's arms at the same time. In both cases, he's between my elbows. And at the same time, Placido is between my knees. Okay, regardless of whether I have butterfly hooks, like so, or conventional hooks. In both cases, he's between my knees. So if you have a situation where he's both between your knees and he's between your elbows, this would be, as it were, the classic form of back control. And every form of the standard back control is based around these ideas, regardless of how you configure your legs. As long as he's between my knees and between my elbows, you are considered to be in the ideal form of back control. Now, the key element to the standard methods of back control is the idea of alignment. My spine is aligned with my opponent's spine. We're in the same axis, as it were, when he's between both the elbows and the knees. This can change when we start to lose control of one part of the equation. There's two parts of the equation. He's going to be between my elbows and between my knees. If I start to lose that element of him being between my knees, he's starting to misalign himself now. I still have back control because he's still between my elbows. But if Placido were to get a hold of my wrist and take into a situation where he's neither between my elbows nor between my knees, then at this point, I have lost control of the back. Okay, so that's the core idea behind back control in the sport of jiu-jitsu. The ideal of back control is to have your opponent between your knees and between your elbows with alignment, both of your spines in the same alignment. From Placido's perspective as the defensive athlete, he's always looking to create misalignment. That misalignment typically starts at the lower body. So if Placido was defending himself here, he would start by getting away from my hooks and misaligning his body relative to mine, so that my spine is no longer locked up with his. As I lose the lower body battle, it becomes more important for me to win the upper body battle and keep him between my elbows. Placido knows that. So a big part of his escapes from these situations is going to be getting to situations where he's neither between my elbows nor my knees, and that signals the end of back control. We can go further with this. Let's start looking at the idea of minimum requirements for back control. If the ideal of back control is to have them between my knees and my elbows at the same time, that's the ideal, that's the best case scenario. What are some situations where you have control but not ideal control? Okay, we know what ideal control is. That's when he's between both my elbows and my knees. We know what's unacceptable when he's neither between my elbows nor my knees. Then we don't have any form of back control. Is there a middle ground? Yes, there is. Okay, this would be examples of, say, diagonal control. In the case of diagonal control, I have upper body control on one side and lower body control on the other side. He's still between my knees and he's still between my elbows. If he goes to move in this direction, my left hand checks him. If he goes to move in the opposite direction, my right foot checks him. So that when we go to move around, if he goes to pee off in this direction, we can stay on an opponent's body very easily with this form of diagonal control and follow movement all the way through 360 degrees. Okay? So diagonal control is, as it were, the minimum requirement for back control. We can go further with this. There are some cases where you have back control where your opponent is not between the elbows and the knees. What are these cases? Well, a cross-body ride would be a good example. And this is based on the notion of diagonal control. If I have an opponent and I control his right side at the lower body with my feet hooked in, like so, and I control his upper body on the opposite side here, you can clearly see that Placido is neither between my elbows, his torso is not inside my elbows, and his hips are not between my knees. Nonetheless, this would still count as an example of back control because we're exercising diagonal control. I have the left side of his upper body control here with this grip, and the right side at the lower body is controlled through the scorpion lock on his ankle. So when Placido goes to move around, he's still controlled and I'm on his back. Okay? So this too would be another example of minimal control for back position. And it breaks the usual logic of back control, which is to control an opponent between the elbows and between the knees at the same time. In the vast majority of cases, all forms of back control have the commonality that your opponent's hips are between your knees and his torso is between your elbows. Okay, and almost every example of back control is based around those core principles. However, there are a few exceptions, as we've seen. Now, the absolute minimum requirement of back control is that your opponent be between your elbows and that you be behind his elbows. So if you're in turtle position, Placido, facing me, this would not be an example of back control because even though I do have chest to back contact, I'm not behind his elbows. Only when we achieve that idea of getting behind an opponent's elbows with chest to back contact with my opponent between my elbows, this is the minimum requirement now for back control. I have chest to back contact, I'm behind his elbows, and Placido's torso, his upper body is between my elbows. Okay? And as long as we have this sort of basic requirement in place, we still count as being on our opponent's back and controlling from the back. So, in quick summary, the whole notion of back control in the sport of jiu-jitsu is based around this core concept of keeping your opponent's upper body between your elbows and his hips, lower body, between your knees. That's the ideal. Looking at minimum requirements, the minimum we need is some form of diagonal control, keeping his upper body between our elbows, and an unacceptably low form of control is one where he is neither between our elbows or between our knees. In that case, there is no back control. He has successfully escaped. So that's, as it were, the logic of standard forms of back control in the sport of jiu-jitsu. And you'll soon see that the back crucifix is a form of back control which breaks some of those rules in a very interesting way. It is a form of back control, but very different from conventional forms. And that's what makes it such a fascinating study that we'll look at throughout this video. Now, we're trying to build a general understanding for back control in jiu-jitsu. We've seen the idea that conventional back control is based around the idea of keeping an opponent between your knees, keeping him between the elbows, or variations where you do it on one side of the body downstairs and the other side of the body upstairs. It's very important you understand that back crucifix control is substantially different from regular back control in jiu-jitsu. This is very important because it means that when you go to attack someone with a back crucifix, very often they will react in ways they think you're on their back. They tend to react in ways which are appropriate for conventional back control, but which are inappropriate for back crucifix control. This often throws your opponents off, and it creates a great opportunity for you to use the differences between the two to your advantage. As your opponent is not experienced in dealing with back crucifix control, typically they're much more experienced dealing with conventional forms of back control. They tend to react in irrational ways to the threat of back crucifixes. And you can use this to your advantage and finish people from a back crucifix that you would normally be unable to finish from more conventional forms of back control. This is one of the chief motivations for you to learn the back crucifix. Now, let's have a look at back crucifix. First, what's the commonality between back crucifix and conventional forms of back control? Well, the commonality is chest to back contact. In both conventional back control and the back crucifix, the minimum requirement is that your chest be in some way, shape, or form connected to your opponent's back. So if I'm attacking my training partner here and I have some variation of back crucifix, the commonality is that my chest be connected to Placido's back to some degree. Usually there is less chest to back contact than conventional forms of back control, but it's still there. Understand that when we start to attack the back crucifix, if we do completely lose chest to back contact and he slides down the body, this signals pretty much the end of effective control from the back crucifix position. Once an opponent completely slides out and no part of my chest is connected to my opponent's back, at this point, we're starting to think in terms of making a switch or at least recovering in some way, shape, or form to get him back into chest-to-back contact. So, for example, from situations like this, I could use pressure on my training partner's arm to draw him back up into a situation where he's motivated to put his back in contact with my chest again. But in general, the commonality between conventional back control and crucifix back control is really based around the idea of chest to back contact. In both cases, this will almost always be true. Now, what are the differences? The most obvious one here is that in conventional forms of back control, I try to keep my opponent between my knees. In the case of back crucifix, you are focused on keeping his elbow between your knees rather than his torso or in particular his hips. Okay, so the whole focus of control changes from keeping my opponent's hips between my knees to keeping his elbow between my knees. So that's a massive difference right off the bat. The other obvious idea here is that conventional forms of back control are based around the idea of alignment. Our two spines are lined up. In the case of the back crucifix, that changes substantially. Your alignment can be anything from a true perpendicular alignment to situations where you are to some degree lined up with your training partner, but still it's not perfect alignment. You're not lined up spine to spine with your opponent between your knees, okay? But there are big differences in alignment between situations where you're close to being aligned to situations where you're perpendicular and not even close. The opposite of alignment, you're at a perpendicular angle. And back crucifix runs the whole gamut from perpendicularity all the way through to a situation where you're close to your opponent's hips with your hips. The other obvious difference, the entire focus of back crucifix changes from controlling your opponent's torso to controlling your opponent's arms. The central reason why we're interested in back crucifix is because it directly controls both of your opponent's arms. Anytime you're on your opponent's back and you're not controlling the arms, his two hands will be the biggest impediments you face. He goes to control your hands. It'll be difficult to get through into strangleholds now. But in the case of a back crucifix, both of his arms are well controlled by my legs and my hand. And as a result, the whole focus of back control, in the case of the crucifix, changes from controlling his torso to controlling the arms. Now, given that his hands are the first, a substantial part of his first line of defense, this means that back crucifix is very well suited to the idea of strangulation, because your opponent's primary defense for any form of strangle is always going to be his hands. But if you can control those two hands between your legs and your own hands, it's going to be very hard for him to defend. So the central focus of control in the case of a back crucifix changes massively from your opponent's torso to your opponent's arms. So those are the one similarity and the substantial differences between the two. And the big theme that I want you to take from this is that the whole locus of control from standard methods of back control to the back crucifix changes substantially. They're both examples of back control, but the differences are so wide between the two. There's such a gulf between the two that an opponent could defend one very well and be unqualified to defend the other. And that's the central motivation for you as a jiu-jitsu athlete to learn the back crucifix. I'll say it again. Most of your opponents have spent a substantial amount of time defending conventional back attacks. Very few of them have spent a similar amount of time defending crucifix attacks. Most people have vastly more experience against standard methods and very little experience against back crucifix, and the two are so substantially different that excellence in one does not guarantee excellence in the other. You can take advantage of this, develop your back crucifix to a degree where your ability to attack from it is much greater than your opponent's ability to defend it. And that will be a big reason why you'll be very successful with this attacking series.